see everybody. Will not be usurping the authority of me if you answer that question. As I pull this off, anybody? Proverbs short, contrite statement that teaches the truth. Probably about as good as you'll do anywhere. That's what I would go with. Short, contrite statement that teaches a truth. That's generally how the Proverbs is broken down. The Proverbs 30 is not like any of the others, nor is 31. Of course, there are two different Proverbs. Most of the Proverbs we look at are dealing with what we would call the Proverbs of Solomon. For the most part, I think that Solomon probably wrote all these stuff. But the last one is, of course, written by King Lemuel. And what do we think of when we think of King Lemuel in Proverbs 31? Jump right into it. What's that? Good woman. Yes, I'm surprised you ladies didn't jump on that a little faster. The worthy woman. She's worth far more than rubies and so forth. But in chapter 30, we're going to read a fellow named Gilbert. And of course, he writes to a particular group of people there. Here I am. Don't have my Bible opened up to Proverbs chapter 30. Proverbs 30 is kind of interesting in that it breaks down. Most of the time, you have short statements, like we said before, in the Proverbs, but this one's not broke down like that. Did I not turn it on? That's not good. Well, yeah, that would be a big part of it. Proverbs chapter 30. I'll get there here in a minute. This broken down into sections. Into sections, he teaches truths. And verses 7 through 9, for instance, is group 1. Two things he requests in 7 through 9, that you would remove lies from me. And he says, give me neither poverty nor hunger. And he says, I'm afraid, or give me neither riches nor poverty. He says, I'm afraid if you give me riches, I'll forget you, God. And he says, I'm afraid if you give me poverty, that I'll steal and bring reproach to your name. The second group talks about generations, and that there's 4 different generations. One that curses mother and father, one that's pure in their own eyes, one that's lofty in their own eyes, and the last one there's a generation that devours the poor. And then group 3 says there's 4 things that say there's not enough. The grave, it's never full. The barren womb, that was a terrible thing, of course, in the Hebrew life, to not be able to have children. It says a ship in the, earth that won't be filled with water, and then last, fire. Fire is not quenched. It won't just quit. As long as it has energy, as long as it has something to eat, fuel, it will continue to burn. If it has all the right things, it just never says, okay, I'm done, And then the next group there, the fourth group, verses 18 and 19, 4 things too wonderful for me. The eagle in the air. He says the serpent on a rock. How does it move? A ship in the water. And he says the way of a man with a maid. The love affair, the romantic side, I believe, there of how a man can grow attached to a woman. He says, who can explain that? And then the one that we're going to, the fifth group, verses 21 through 23, 4 things the earth cannot bear: a servant when he is king, a odious woman when she is married, a fool when he is filled with food, and a handmaid that's heir to her mistress. And then the one we're going to be looking at tonight is God's 4 little creatures. God's 4 little creatures. And let's just go ahead and read that while we're here. This, of course, is verse 25 beginning. The ants are a people not strong, yet they prepare their meat in the summer. The conies are but a feeble folk, but make their houses in the rocks. The locusts have no king, yet they go forth, all of them by bands. And the spider, American Standard there, I believe, has lizard. Most of your newer translations will. There's good textual evidence that that's the creature being spoken of. The lizard takes hold, or the spider, with her hands and is in king's palaces. It's interesting. Notice how he introduced this section. He says, there are 4 things which are little. They're insignificant, and sometimes if we weren't paying attention, we could just absolutely miss them. Unless you step into a pile, say, of fire ants. Then all of a sudden you're very aware of those. But, ants are going about their business. There's thousands of them, perhaps more than that, in your yard at any given time, and they're doing their thing. You just don't pay attention to them. He says, the four little things, little upon the earth, but they are exceeding wise. And with each one of these animals, the ant, the coney, the locust, and the spider or lizard, there's something negative said about them. It's a great weakness they have. Yet with that great weakness, they overcome it. First of all, for the ant, he's small. He's a little bitty thing. But he works. He works all summer and prepares. The coney's feeble. It can't do much for itself. It's not a ferocious creature. It's defenseless, really, except for where it chooses to live. It's a feeble folk, can't defend itself. The locusts, they have no king. And then the last negative statement, the spider, or the lizard, taketh hold with her hands. So with those four little wise creatures, we're going to draw some conclusions on some things that we learn from that. First of all, the ant, diligent preparation. Diligent preparation. The Bible tells us, study to show thyself approved, a workman that needeth not be ashamed, rightly dividing the word truth. The American Standard there says give diligence. That's the idea there, to put forth the effort. The ant puts forth the effort because, well, they want to eat in the winter and there won't be any supplies. Proverbs 6:6-8. Notice this with me if you will. Go to the ant, thou sluggard, consider her ways and be wise, which having no guide, overseer, or ruler, provideth her meat in the summer and gathereth her food in the harvest. The ants survive. They work all summer. They gather up. We've often heard fables, teach us little children's stories about these creatures that teach us a good work ethic, and that you can't, remember the one about the ant and the grasshopper wouldn't, take the time. He was too busy out enjoying life and playing and didn't want to, prepare. And, of course, winter came and he didn't have opportunity. Well, Christians should. As looking at this ant, we should work in the summer of life. We should work in the summer of life. Jeremiah chapter 8 is just talking about the terrible situation that's going on in Jerusalem, the southern kingdom, Judah, and how that they're not repenting. And he talks about how that they're not prepared, and it makes a terribly woeful statement in chapter 8, verse 20. He says, the harvest is past, the summer is ended, and we are not saved. In other words, the opportunity has come and has gone, and we are not going to be able to pull ourselves out of this situation. He's talking about the nation of Judah and how it just continued to even though God sent warning after warning, the people paid no attention to what God was saying, was not paying any attention to the prophets. Jeremiah didn't pay attention to Isaiah, any of the prophets that were contemporary with Isaiah or Jeremiah. They simply kept trotting on. Even before this, he said they were so where they couldn't even blush. They were not shamed. That's mentioned several times in the early chapters of Jeremiah, that people had gotten so hard-hearted that they couldn't even blush. So he says the harvest is past, the summer is ended, and we are not saved. And there's nothing you can do about it at this point. It's gone. For Judah, it meant they were going to go into Babylonian captivity. For us, it would mean we've left this world, and there's nothing we can do about it. Notice also that lost opportunities, they will most definitely be regretted. Think of, first of all, Luke 16 comes to mind. You have the parable of the rich man and Lazarus. What's the first thing that the rich man, he realized his present condition. He says, Father Abraham, would you get Lazarus to dip his finger in some water and touch it to my tongue, for I am tormented in this flame? And immediately his thoughts go to his brothers. And now he wants to be a soul winner. He's concerned about salvation. He's concerned about God and thinking about God. Yet when he was alive, those things just really didn't mean a lot to him. Well, he's changed his perspective, and definitely he regrets that lost opportunity. Notice with me, if you will, in Luke 13, beginning with verse 24. Jesus says, strive to enter at the straight gate. Now, this is somewhat parallel to what we find in Matthew chapter 7. He says, for many, I say unto you, will seek to enter in, and they won't be able. It'll be past time. When once the master of the house has risen up and shut to the door, and ye begin to stand without and to knock on the door, saying, Lord, Lord, open unto us. And he shall answer and say unto you, I know not whence you are. In other words, I don't know who you are. You've missed that opportunity. It's kind of like the bridegrooms, and the 10 virgins. 5 were prepared, 5 were not. But when they went to get the stuff to get prepared and came back, it was too late. The door was shut. So this teaches the idea there's a time of preparation, but there's a time when that time will run out, and there will be no more. Verse 26. Then shall you begin to say, we have eaten and drunk in thy presence. Don't you remember us, Lord? We were right there. Thou hast taught many in our streets. It's the same as in Matthew chapter 7 when he says, Lord, Lord, we've preached in your name. We've cast out demons. We've done all these wonderful works. And Jesus says, depart from me. I never knew you. He says, we have taught. You taught in our streets. Don't you remember me? Don't you remember back in Jerusalem when you were? No, it'll be too late. Verse 27, for he shall say, I tell you, I know you not whence you are. Depart from me, all ye workers of iniquity. So we need to prepare while we have time. Notice verse 28, there shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth when ye shall see Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and all the prophets in the kingdom of God, and you yourselves thrust out. Now here, of course, he's talking to the children of Israel. He's talking to those people who did not accept John's baptism. They weren't accepting Jesus as the Christ. And he says, you know, these people you look up to, Abraham and all Moses and all these guys, Abraham was glad to see my day, Jesus would say. But you won't have anything to do with me. So what he's telling them here, they're going to be saved, and you're going to see it, and you're going to be lost. Notice also, wintertime comes. There comes a time when you and I will not be able to do what we can do now. Maybe it's through our age. I was noticing tonight, brethren, I don't know if it's my sinuses right now or what, but I've been having some trouble hearing, been having trouble pitching, and so I'm kind of wondering if I'm, starting to lose a little bit of my hearing. That wouldn't surprise me at all. I was just a drummer for, 7, 8 years. I was in artillery for 4 years, tanks for 7.5 years, and fought, used to, when I was young, we'd go shoot guns and things and didn't think about earplugs and things of that nature. So but there comes a time when you won't be able to function. You won't be able to do the things that you can do now. Also, things change. When somebody passes from life to death, they've gone from the summer of their life to the winter, and you're not going to be able to deal with them anymore. You can't talk to them anymore. You can't approach them and tell them about the Christ and about salvation and so forth. That window of opportunity is dried up. But Jesus would say something along the same lines when he says, I work the works of him that sent me while it is day. The night cometh when no man can work. There is a time and an opportunity to do some things, and then there's a time when that will no longer be the case. The Ecclesiastes writer, I believe, brings just the idea of us growing older and puts it in real perspective. There'll come a time, he says, worship the Creator in the days of your youth, before the troublesome times come, the times when he sums it all up and says there's going to get to a point where you say, man, I have no pleasure in these days. I just wish the Lord would take me home. It hurts to even breathe, so I'm ready to go. And that's the point the Ecclesiastes writer is trying to make in chapter 12. And I think this is what Jesus is saying. You've got an opportunity. You've got to take advantage of that opportunity. Galatians 6:10 says, as we have therefore opportunity, let us do good unto all men, especially unto them of the household of faith. So we have a responsibility to do good to everyone that we can. You got to have opportunity. As Joseph Parton told me a few days ago, I hadn't seen Joseph today. I hadn't seen Forrest and Joe Stewart either. I know we have one family that's up in Gatlinburg, but with their grandkids, but we'll have to call them. What's that? Joseph's sick. Boy, I hate to hear that. He's not felt well. Who's that? Forrest was here, but Joe wasn't with him. And I didn't see him. I know they've got part of that bunch is up in Smokies. Well, I'll be thinking about Joseph. Y'all remember him in your prayers. Also, Patty, something I meant to mention this morning at Sunday school after the cameras go off, was Walker is, he's not out running around, but he's able to take visitors down and so forth. If you'd like to go by, I think that'd be just fine. I'm always afraid in a situation like that, somebody will try to get up, and answer the door or something. I'm like, which one's open? Notice also the coney here. The coney, he doesn't have anything really to protect himself. He doesn't have tremendous claws and teeth that, are made for killing or defending. He has teeth, of course, and claws, but this is also called the rock badger. Anybody have a newer translation open right now in EF? Corey, you got your ESV up? Rock badger. Yeah, it's a small little animal, and And basically, they'd be extinct, if it wasn't for the fact that they live up in the rocks. And one will it's kind of like mind you of prairie dogs. You know how prairie dogs will kind of stand up, and the others are doing their thing, and then they make that little sound they make, and they all scurry. Same idea with these little conies or rock badgers. They have a sure refuge. They are cliff dwellers, no real defense mechanism. Where they live is their defense mechanism. And, like conies, we're helpless as men. Jeremiah 10:23 says, "O Lord, I know that the way of man is not in himself. It's not in man that walketh to direct his steps." We are powerless to overcome the sin problem that we have. It's something that God had to do for us. God had to take care of that sin problem. He sent his son to die upon the cross for our sins, that if we will obey him, we can have access to that forgiveness, that salvation. But in and of ourselves, we were not capable. That's why it's God's plan. It's God's scheme of redemption. He gives the rules, if you will. And so many times people forget that and just say, well, God's He's going to treat me okay. He's going to treat me right, and I'll do whatever I want to do. That's not how God approaches this at all. So he gives us his word. Notice our refuge must not be in lies. Now I want to show you a people how, we talk about one of probably the worst deceptions you can have, self-deception. And that's exactly what you have. Now remember Isaiah, he's around when you have both the northern and the southern kingdom. And he's writing to the northern kingdom, and he's trying to tell them, look, it's done. It's over. You've missed your window of opportunity. You're going to be destroyed. He also tries to warn the southern kingdom. But I think it's interesting here. He points out the fact, of course, he's inspired of God. God is saying this to Israel, that they have just made up lies and said, okay, this is our story. This is our plan. It's all a lie, but we're sticking to it. Notice in Isaiah 28, verse 15, because we have said, we have made a covenant with death. In other words, Israel saying, we've made a covenant of death with hell. We are in agreement with the overflowing scourge shall pass through. It shall not come unto us, for we have made lies our refuge, and under falsehood have we hid ourselves. In other words, they're just telling you straight up, this ain't right. There's no truth in this, but this is where we stand. This is going to be our motto. This is what we're going to run with. And God, of course, says, that's foolish. Don't make your refuge. Notice, for we have made lies our refuge. Well, that's not any kind of refuge. And under falsehood have we hid ourselves. Well, that's no kind of refuge. That's nowhere to hide yourself. You're going to be found out. You're going to be destroyed. And, of course, they were. They were destroyed. So our refuge must not be lies, but our refuge is God. Same context as Isaiah chapter 28. He goes on in verse 16 and says, therefore, thus saith the Lord God, behold, I lay in Zion a foundation, a stone. Now, every one of us knows what that's talking about. It's talking about the Christ. God says, a tried stone, a precious cornerstone, a sure foundation. He that believeth shall not make haste. In other words, this is where you ought to have your refuge, in this cornerstone. But what does the New Testament say about that cornerstone? What does Peter preach about that cornerstone? What did they do to that cornerstone? They rejected it. They rejected the cornerstone. The cornerstone that God had given, for the most part, Jews rejected him. Now, of course, the early church were all Jews, first 8 years there. And you had some that accept, but most of the nation did not. They continued to believe in that which wasn't true. And so God says, I've given you this refuge, this cornerstone. A couple of times, you see this all in the book of Psalms. Psalms 94:22, the Lord is my defense, and my God is the rock of my refuge. So we see that over and over in Psalms 9:9. The Lord also will be a refuge for the oppressed, a refuge in times of trouble. And you can read all the Psalms of David where he's, in situations with Saul, being chased, the cave of Adullam, and so forth, and he'll refer to God as his refuge. Because he didn't have one. He was running around without a place to live, running from Saul, didn't have any, place to stay all the time. So as we go on, we see that the locust now, the idea of unity and cooperation. There would be no plague. There would have been no plague of locusts had the locusts not stuck together. It's a terrible plague. It says, if you think about how many times stuff came in out of the east wind blew and separated the waters for the children of Israel to go through. And, of course, we know there was a miraculous manifestation in that, too, because the waters piled up on each other on both sides. So it couldn't have just been the east wind. There was a miracle of God there. And also it says the east wind blew all night, and the next day it blew in these locusts. And these locusts just covered the ground. In Joel chapter 2, now Joel chapter 2, we're familiar with that because Joel chapter 2, verses 28 through 32 is quoted by Peter in Acts chapter 2. And he says, this is that which is spoken of by the prophet Joel, and he quotes the end part of chapter 2 there. But in the beginning of that, Joel is talking about a locust plague. God is going to punish Israel, and he's bringing this team of locusts, this swarm of locusts to come in, because what is the locust's strength? It doesn't have a king. Yet when these things get up into that, and I mean it happens even today, they will go into this kind of mechanism where they, the way, I don't even know how you'd even explain it, but their hormones change, and the small cricket that we're usually used to seeing grows, and they can grow quite large, and they're in this feeding frenzy, and they continue to grow, and some of them are huge. Look what Joel says about locusts and what they do. Verse 7, beginning of Joel 2, they run like mighty men. They shall climb the wall like men of war. They're all over the place. They swarm, and they shall march every one on his ways. And they shall not break their ranks. They start, they go. You don't have one bunch going over here, another bunch going over there. They would lose that power and strength. And notice, neither shall one thrust another. They don't attack, they don't eat each other. They shall walk every one in his path, and when they fall upon the sword, they shall not be wounded. In other words, you can try all day with swords and spears and bow and arrows. You're not going to keep these guys from, taking over. They shall run to and fro in the city, and they shall run upon the wall, climb up upon the houses. They shall enter in the windows like a thief, and the Lord shall utter his voice before his army. What army? The army of locusts. For his camp is very great, for he is strong that executeth his word. For the day of the Lord, remember we spent a lot of time on that this morning, this idea of the day of the Lord. Here it's a historical judgment. This is Israel being punished. Here I am looking for that. This is Israel being punished in a day and time, not the end of time, not that day that we talk about, the day of judgment, but this was a particular judgment upon Israel, and these locusts are the ones that are executing that judgment. The day of the Lord is great and terrible, and who can abide it? Well, profitable for lessons for churches here, no doubt about it. And what are those? Well, first of all, with division comes weakness. A church can't be what it needs to be if it's divided. Jesus would say in Matthew 12:25, Jesus knew their thoughts and said unto them, every king divided against itself, because remember they were saying he cast out the demons by the power of Beelzebub. He said every kingdom divided against itself is brought to desolation, and every city or house divided against itself shall not stand. That's just that's in life. That's something we ought to see. So in the church, it's no better. 1 Corinthians chapter 1 and verse 13, Paul will ask, is Christ divided? Was Paul crucified for you? Or were you baptized in the name of Paul? In other words, he's really chiding them for this division. It's something they don't need to have because it will hurt the church at Corinth. And Paul, of course, wants them to stay away from it. Well, notice as we go on here, the strength is in unity. For some reason, I cut off verse 20. I do not know why. But strength is in unity. John 17, verse 20, Jesus begins the prayer, and he says, not only, or I pray not for these alone, the apostles, but for them that shall believe on me through their word. And notice what he goes on to say. He goes on to say that they shall be one, or that they may be one. As thou, Father, art in me, and I in thee, that they also may be one in us, that the world may believe that thou hast sent us. What a great message that would be if all Christianity preached one lesson, not one lesson, but one message. And that the gospel from Genesis 1 to Revelation 22 was upheld by every Christian. And that Christians didn't have popes, or Christians didn't have these man-made societies that they just kind of dreamed up and said, well, let's do things this way and go away from what Jesus says this is, the world will know that we're one. But, of course, you can see that the world doesn't have that kind of evidence because we're anything but. Verse 22, and the glory which thou gavest me I have given them, this is the apostles, that they may be one even as we are one. I in them and thou in me, that they may be perfect in one, and that the world may know that thou hast sent me and hast loved them as thou hast loved me. Of course, here he's praying not only for them, but for us as well. Ecclesiastes 4:9, just one of those passages that sticks out in your mind, great wisdom literature. Two are better than one. One person falls down, how's he going to get up? It says, because they have a good reward for their labor. For if they fall, the one will lift up his fellow. But woe to him that is alone when he falleth, for he hath not another to help him. We think about the threefold cord, not easily broken. If you want to try to pull something with something else, you need more strength. You'll double up, triple up, however many times you need to make that rope just as strong as it possibly can. That's the idea there. And then back to 1 Corinthians 1, which, he said before, was Christ, is Christ divided? Was Paul baptized for you? Or were you baptized in the name of Paul? Did Paul die for you? Before that, he says, I beg you, brethren, I beseech you, brethren, by the name of the Lord Jesus, that you speak the same thing, and that there be no divisions among you, because division causes weakness. Division will destroy. A house that is divided cannot stand. So the church needs to have that solidarity as much as possible. Then we go to the spider. I stayed with the spider. Even though the Hebrew, most of the best evidence out there, this probably should be a lizard. Those lizards with those little cupped feet. They can go anywhere. And the idea is there that they taketh hold. You have to appreciate a spider and the way they can just go up the wall. I'll tell you what really gets me is when you're at home, and you got like white ceilings, and you look up and there's one of them boogers crawling across the top, and you're going like, how can they even do that? They've got they do that, and they'll put themselves in places, and, sometimes you just, like when you're walking through maybe your garage or somewhere, and, we've all done this. You walked through there 10 times yesterday, but you walk through there today, and that spider web catches you about eye level high, and you're like, the first thing I think of is, what a geek. Why would you build that there? I mean, this is a doorway, but they do it anyway. And the proverb writer even says they're in king's houses, The king may have a team of maids and people, but that doesn't keep these spiders out. They're diligent. They're going to get in there, and they're going to do things. The one-talent man was afraid, and that's something the spider's not afraid. Don't care about you. He's going to run that spider web across there because he just might catch them off, before tomorrow. He ain't worried about tomorrow. So they do that. The one-talent man, remember what he did? He took his talent. He says, I was afraid, and went and hid that talent. Well, we can't be fearful. We need to be like that spider, because what does the Bible say about cowards? Cowards will be in the lake of fire, Revelation 21:8. I took this from the New American Standard Bible. I believe the English Standard reads this as well, and the New King James too talks about the cowardly and the unbelieving. Well, they're going to be in the lake of fire. They're going to be you can't be a coward and be a Christian, because Christianity demands that we speak up and that we say some things. There's a story of Scotland, of Bruce of Scotland. Bruce, on the death of, what was that guy's name? Y'all help me out, all you history majors. They made a movie about him, Braveheart, William Wallace. You remember him? He kind of tried to, stir Scotland up. And so Robert Bruce, the king, said, okay, you know what, I'm going to do this. I'm going to, declare my dad's throne, and we're going to separate from England. And it didn't go real well for him. As a matter of fact, he was defeated no less than 6 times. He was exiled. He was an outlaw in his own country. And the story goes that he was away from Scotland, out in some area, and he was in a shack, and it was windy, and he was like in the water, on the water close by, and the wind was shooting through, and he had a little fire. I mean, he was just very desperate. His last standing castle had been taken. His brother had been executed, and his wife was held prisoner by Edward Longshanks, who was known Longshanks because he had long legs. And he had his wife, and he was just like, you know what? He was thinking, because he had killed men in battle, but he had also killed men in cold blood. And he was seriously contemplating going to fight for the Crusades, go to Jerusalem. And he thought maybe if he died in battle, maybe God would forgive him fighting for, the cause of God, he thought. And he was sitting there, and a spider caught his eye that was coming off. And this is how the poems go. This is legend. And this spider was trying to get to another beam, trying to swing itself to another beam, to start its web. And he said it just so happened he saw it, and it caught his eye, and he watched it do that 6 times. 6 times, and he thought to himself, he said, you know what, I've been defeated by the English 6 times. He said, I'm going to watch this spider. If he tries it again and makes it, well, I'm going to fight the English. But if he doesn't make it, I'm going to Jerusalem, and I'm going to fight in the Holy Wars. Well, sure enough, that little spider jumps over and is able to get to the other beam, and he says, well, I'm going to go fight England. And for the next 8 years, he fought England, and with a force of 5,000 men defeated Longshanks' son of 20,000, and Scotland was free from the British. And so I thought that was a pretty interesting story about of course, if you're going to use the lizard there, you'll have to throw that example out, right, because it just won't fit. But I thought that was pretty neat. Here, this little old spider, and he used that. Well, we need to have courage and perseverance. Notice Matthew 10:28. Fear not them which can kill the body. No, men can sure do that. They can kill bodies and they can take our life, but they're not able to kill the soul. Jesus said, fear him, talking about God the Father, who can kill both soul and body in hell. And then Matthew 24:12, because iniquity shall abound, the love of many shall wax cold. People will be ugly. We'll see sin and stuff around this fire that we have as Christians sometimes. We can lose that. But notice what he says in verse 13, but he that shall endure unto the end, the same shall be saved. So what do we learn from that spider? Endurance. Endurance, the race. I mean, we could, so many examples that we can think of, biblical examples of keeping your nose to the grind. Don't give up. And when things look bad, keep going. Be what you ought to be and try with all your heart. And you're going to be successful, even if, men take your life. So from the ant, take advantage of the opportunities when we have them. Work in the summer. The winter's coming when you won't be able to work. Work while you have the opportunity. What about the rock badger? Will take refuge in the rock of ages. God is our refuge. From the locust, cooperate with God's people. It's the thing about locusts. They are successful without a king. Surely we as Christians can be successful with a king, can we not? King Jesus. And then last but not least, the ant teaches, the spider, to persevere unto the end. What about you tonight? If you're here and not a New Testament Christian, well, you need to obey the gospel. You can't even use these examples of longevity and diligence and so forth. You haven't taken the first step. You need to do that. You need to be right with God. Remember, it's God's plan. He has given the ground rules. He said, here's what you must do to be saved. That's men would ask, what must I do to be saved? Understood, we need to do something, and God has told us exactly what to do. Maybe in times past we've been a faithful member of the church. We've left our first love. The Lord also has instructed us on what to do in those situations as well. The invitation is extended. If you're a subject at all, we encourage you to come while we stand and sing.
Would you be free from the